When I went to seminary in Minnesota, I had psyched myself out about how cold it was going to be. And I was just like so focused on thinking that I was going to live in the tundra and that the weather was going to be this insurmountable challenge. But it turned out when I got to Minnesota that the cold really wasn't that problematic. I mean, it is weird when your eyelashes kind of start to freeze together, but that really wasn't the challenge. The challenge is that I discovered that I didn't speak Minnesotan. And I don't just simply mean like I had to use words like pop instead of soda. But really there was a different way in which people from Minnesota converse. So I had grown up in the Philly bubble, and then I lived in New York, and then I went to Minnesota. And in Philly bubble and New York, you interrupt somebody to show that you're paying attention. Right? I mean, interrupting is a way of saying, I'm tracking and I'm excited by what you're saying. Okay? Turns out that in Minnesota, interrupting is not a love language. Not how it works. One person talks. The next person says their comment. And we talk like this. And if you're from Philadelphia, this drives you absolutely nuts. I didn't know the territory. I didn't know how to speak. I was an outsider looking in. Well, a year later, a bunch of new kids, a new crop of young people wanting to go to seminary arrived. And when I heard these East Coasters talk, they were so loud and obnoxious to me. I had shifted over. I'd become an insider of sorts. I want to reflect with you today on being an outsider and being an insider, in part because that's what this story from Ruth is about today. Ruth is an outsider, Naomi's the bridge builder, and Boaz is the insider. Also because this Lent we've been thinking about life together, and many points in our lives, we don't find ourselves part of life together, but we find ourselves kind of on the outside looking in. And part of that is just the way that life today works, with really large school districts where you often end up maybe even going to different schools with different people and different classes. Part of it is also the modern economy where we have to kind of work to find jobs. We often have to move or go to school or trade school. And then also just the reality of online dating. So many people, again, don't really settle where they grew up. Raise your hand if you did not grow up in the school district where you now live. Right? Almost all of us in life have to experience entering into new communities. And if you live in a community like Lititz that has had sort of such an influx of population, even if you're an insider, you certainly have people that are coming that weren't here before. So I want to reflect on this insider-outsider and what does it mean in a world full of transitions for us to have life and have life together. And so we get at this by looking at this story here of Ruth. And last week, she declared kind of famously to Naomi that her people would be Naomi's people, her God would be Naomi's God, and so forth. This is really kind of emotional decision. And now some of the reality of this decision is settling in. Because now she's in a new place, a new country. She's at a place where the people don't speak really the dialect that she would have grown up with. They don't eat the same foods. They don't pray the same way. They have different customs. She's an immigrant. So she's on the outside. My sense is that although Ruth's experience is different than ours, almost all of us have been on the outside. Maybe it's when you went to the next grade, or again, you went to middle school, or went to high school, or when your parents moved. Or maybe it's when you went away to school or your job, or a job took you to a promotion and you lived in a new community, or you were moving into a retirement community. Or maybe for some of you, it's when you went to camp for the first time and had to remember, like, oh, I've never been here before. Or even for some of you, it's been when you've lived overseas, or maybe some of you were born in a foreign country and now live in this country. Again, I think almost all of us have had that experience of being on the outside, looking in, hoping we could have life together, sensing we're not quite there yet. And although that can be really hard, there's also something really beautiful about those times in life. I found that in my life, when I've been on the outside, it has forced me to dig deeper into my prayer life, to not rely on my own understandings, but really rely on God to show me a way, to live on the mercy of other people, and to discover God's grace. Ruth here in this story has to take a risk. She's got to put herself out there. Again, in life, when we're on the outside, we often have to take a risk. And then discover again and again, God's mercy is there for us. When I lived in New York City, I had an African-American friend who invited me to go with him to church pretty regularly. And we would go up to a church, a small Pentecostal church in the northern part of the east side, really, truly in Harlem. And I wasn't just the only white person in the church. I was the only white person for about 5 blocks in either direction. I was an outsider. But everybody, of course, was very gracious to me. But what I discovered there was a group of people who were having life together. And many of them were facing incredible obstacles, but they were gathering every week to glorify God. And it was beautiful to witness and to feel a part of their community. And I remember one particular Sunday where a woman got up to give her witness about being healed from cancer. And it was very moving. But I don't just mean it was moving like she said some words that hit my heart. I mean, it was moving because as she spoke, she began to speak, and it was quiet at first. And she was kind of standing still, but as she spoke more, she began to move more. And as she began to move more, then the people in the congregation began to move more. And eventually there became a rhythmic clapping to it. And then somebody got out a tambourine, and there was a call and response. And we were with her in this story. And then finally, when she said that the doctor declared that she had no more cancer in her body, everybody just gave a shout, and she just broke into dance, and the whole place erupted in motion. It was beautiful to see. Again, when we're on the outside, it forces us to take risks, and in so doing, to trust God and to realize that God's hands are there to catch us and to see a broader glimpse of that divine, loving mercy that we just prayed for. So when in your life have you been a Ruth? When have you experienced that need, or maybe even now, that calling to take a risk and to trust that God will find you and will bring you into life together? For Ruth, a crucial part of her moving from an outsider to an insider is Naomi. And Naomi's somebody who has lived in both worlds. Naomi grew up in Bethlehem, but Naomi she's also somebody who has lived in Moab. And so when Ruth comes back to Bethlehem and to Israel, Naomi kind of knows what Ruth is seeing, what Ruth is expecting. And this is so crucial in helping Ruth kind of cross that bridge so that Ruth can know, for instance, like, that's the field you definitely want to glean in that field. Because that man, Boaz, is not only a distant family member, but Boaz is also a good man, and he obeys our tribe's ancient teachings to leave extra food for the poor and the foreigner. So yes, that's the field to go to. It's like when I was in Minnesota my first year, it was my uncle and my aunt who had both lived in Minnesota and also the East Coast, who told me, Rob, when they tell you your idea is interesting, they don't actually think it's interesting. They think it's dumb. That's just their really nice way of saying that. And I was like, oh, okay, right? Or last summer, there was a camp counselor at Kirchenwald who was from Tanzania. And the camps like to have people from our partner synod in Tanzania come over. Now, I've been to Tanzania a little bit, and so I knew when this person was coming to visit us, her name was Subi, that the dog would really be hard for her. Because in Tanzania, nobody, especially in the part where she is from in Tanzania, has dogs in their house. People are struggling to get food for humans. You would never have a dog in the house. It would be like, for me as an American, walking into somebody's home and they have squirrels. Like, why in the world would you do that? And I knew that this was going to be a really big deal, which is kind of funny because our dog, when you walk in our house, our dog's reaction is to roll over on its back and expect you to give it a belly rub. Like, it is like the most docile creature ever. But this really was really hard for her. We had to kind of figure this out. And there was much more we had to learn about how new and how different it was to live in a house than anywhere Subi had ever lived before. Again, when we enter into a new community, when we want to have life together, we need to have somebody who's kind of been an insider and an outsider to say, that's the way. So maybe for some of you that are going back to camp this year, there's going to be somebody who's never been to camp. And you get to be a Naomi. You get to be one who says, no, you want to eat a lot of this dinner because the dessert isn't good tonight. Or whatever it is, right? You want to show them the way. Or maybe in a community like Lititz, when we have new people come, you can say to them, no, July 4th is really big. And they'll say, oh, yeah, of course. They'll be like, no. July 4th is really, really big here, right? You want to show them what it's like to be here. So who in your life do you want to celebrate and lift up because they've been a Naomi for you? They've been somebody who kind of shows you the way into a group, into a church, into your place of work. And how might you be called to be a Naomi, to be somebody who helps that person because you've kind of been where they are? Maybe not exactly, but you've been on the outside or the outside of this community, and you can kind of help them find their way in, that they can discover life and life together. And that's of course important in every aspect of our life, but I would even say too in the church. As more and more people come to us who don't necessarily have a lot of church background, that think we're called to be Naomis and to really help people understand what's going on and the way we play ball here. The character that we're introduced to new in the story, the person is Boaz, right? Ruth and Naomi we had last week, but now there's a new person, Boaz. And Boaz he's kind of the man. He holds the cards. He's in this Hallmark movie called Ruth, he's the eligible bachelor. He's got all the land. And he's the one who's faithful and abides by these ancient rules to make sure that out of his property that it provides for those who are in need in the community. Again, he's one who uses his surplus and his strength for those who are on the margins. And it's so important in life that it's the Boazes who finally are able to kind of welcome the Ruths, who are able to say to the outsiders, no, you are with us. In college, I was a leader in a retreat program. And I was really excited to be a leader, but I realized quickly as I looked out at the other leaders that they kind of were in kind of two things. One, they were overwhelmingly Roman Catholic, and second, they were all cool people. I've never been Roman Catholic, and I probably haven't been cool that many days in my life either. I was more the one you wanted to help you with your math homework than necessarily invite to a party on Friday night. But I know that's a surprise for you all. But anyway, so there I was, and there was this one guy named John Butler, and John Butler was somebody who every day of his life had been both Roman Catholic and cool, right? You know, the kid that just has always been and always will be cool. That was John Butler. And John Butler, for some reason, decided that, I don't know, whatever it was, that I was nice enough, friendly enough, whatever, funny enough, whatever it was, he decided that he was okay with me. And he basically, kind of gave me his seal of John Butler approval, and that seal meant that I was now in, and the rest of my whole college social trajectory was very different because John Butler said, this guy can be with us. Again, in life, there is a need for people like Boaz, the people that have to look out for those that don't have, for those that are on the inside, to look out for those who are on the outside. And you may find yourself in your family. You may find yourself at your work. You may find yourself at your retirement community. You may find yourself in this church. You may find yourself on the playground at school as the Boaz, as the one who holds the cards, as the cool kid. as the one who can authorize and accept those who are weaker and on the outside. And that is a holy and divine work that we're called to as Christians. So the story here of Ruth, Naomi, and Boaz, again, is over 3,000 years old, but it's a story we can find ourselves in. And in fact, in different chapters of your life, some chapters of your life, you may really feel like you are Ruth and you're on the outside and you feel like you're just so vulnerable and you see life together and you want it, but it's not there for you. Other times you may sense you're called to be a Naomi, to kind of help point somebody, this is how you do it. This is how we do it here. And other times you may find yourself like Boaz, as one who holds the card and looks out then after those who are on the margins and brings them in, that they might too experience life together. And that can happen again in our family, our workplace, and our nation on so many levels. And at different chapters of our life, we'll find ourselves really kind of in different roles in this story. But what about Jesus? Where is Jesus in this story? Well, you could say Jesus is the descendant of Ruth and Boaz, and that's where he comes in. But I think Jesus is, well, I see Jesus really all over this story. Jesus, in many ways, is Boaz. He's Boaz supreme. He holds all the cards. Jesus is the one through whom all things were made. Jesus is the one who has all the power in the universe. There's nobody worthy of more honor and glory and praise than Jesus. And it's finally Jesus who's going to give us his seal of approval. It's Jesus the one who has defeated death, who can stand at the gates of heaven and at the gates of hell. And finally, when we're there at the gates, he can say that, no, they're with me. They're with me, you see. My coolness covers them. They're with me. But in order for Jesus to really be the Boaz for us, he actually had to become Ruth for us. Jesus had to become not only human, but one who was on the margins and one who was on the outside. Jesus in his own life has to move around, flee from those who would wish to harm him. And he spends his ministry at first going to those on the outside, teaching his disciples that to be a Christian is to go to those on the margins. And eventually he spends so much time forgiving sinners, eating with people that were disregarded and disgraced, that finally he's no longer welcome in social and polite company. But he won't stop. And it just keeps going, and he spends so much time on the margins that finally they gather everybody and they say, we've got to get rid of him. And the whole crowd begins to chant, crucify him, crucify him. And they stick him outside of the town. And there, as he takes our sins, our estrangement into his body, he cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus knows what it means to be the outsider, and he chose to be the outsider for our sake. He chose to be the one who knew what it was like to be scorned, unappreciated, and unwelcome. And he did so for your sake, so that he could become the Naomi. He could become the one, yes, who has knowledge of what heaven is like, but also knows what it's like to be us on earth. He knows what it's like to be a human. He knows what it's like to get made fun of. He knows what it's like to be in a room and feel like nobody gets me because I'm different than other people. He knows what it's like to feel temptation. He knows what it's like to feel tears running down his face. Yet he chooses not to leave us behind, but to take us with him. He chooses to show us the way into life and to life together, to call us, to form us into a community. And then finally, one day to give us his robes and his righteousness, that indeed we might know forever that we belong to him. Thanks be to God. Amen.